Your audit system flagged a flange 14 months ago. The finding is still open, and the flange is still leaking. Not because no one noticed, because everyone noticed, and the notice went nowhere. In fact, the maintenance log shows this same flange has been flagged 3 separate times in the last 18 months. Each time a work order was raised. Each time the job slipped down the priority list. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The last process safety audit noted this exact flange as an open finding. And that finding is now 430 days overdue. Think of it like a smoke detector that someone taped a sticky note over instead of replacing the battery. The note says, "Alarm known, being handled." But the room is still filling with smoke. The audit system said the problem was known, but knowing a problem exists and actually fixing it are two completely different things. When overdue audit findings pile up, they do not sit quietly. They hide real hazards in plain sight. They tell the team the system is working when it is not. And one day that flange stops being a nuisance and becomes something far more serious. This video shows exactly how that happens and the 3 checks that stop it before it escalates. Process safety audits exist for one reason: to check that the barriers between your team and a major accident are actually working. A barrier is like a locked gate between a hazard and the people it could harm. Audits check that every gate is locked. But audit findings, the written records of gates that need attention, are only useful if someone closes them on time. Right now, across the oil and gas industry, overdue action items from process safety audits represent one of the most consistent leading indicators of future incidents. The Center for Chemical Process Safety, known as CCPS, developed its risk-based process safety framework, called RBPS, which identifies auditing as one of 20 critical management system elements. CCPS guidance, published in its 2011 second edition of Guidelines for Auditing Process Safety Management Systems, is explicit. An audit program that generates findings without a disciplined closure process is not a safety improvement tool. It is a documentation exercise. And documentation alone has never stopped a hydrocarbon release. The same RBPS framework lists finding closure rate and finding age as essential performance metrics, not optional, not recommended, but essential. Sites that do not track these metrics are flying without instruments. The industry has seen this pattern many times, and the consequences have been severe, including fatalities, significant releases, and regulatory enforcement actions. The question is not whether this pattern exists. The question is whether your site is repeating it right now. You've been in this exact situation. You are doing a site walk-down, a physical inspection of the plant. You pass a flange on a hydrocarbon line. There is a faint stain on the insulation below the joint. It might be old. It might be nothing. You check the maintenance register and see a work order. It says raised, not yet scheduled. You check the audit finding tracker. Same flange. Finding raised 14 months ago. Due date passed. Status open. So someone already knew. The finding exists. The work order exists. The paperwork says the system is working. But the stain on that insulation tells a different story. In simple terms, the system has confused writing down a problem with solving a problem. Those are not the same thing. The flange does not care how many forms have been filled out. It only responds to a wrench, a gasket replacement, or a proper isolation. And until that physical work is done and verified, every document in the tracker is just a record of intent. What makes this especially dangerous is the false confidence it creates. When a supervisor or area engineer checks the tracker and sees an entry next to that flange, the natural human response is to feel that the hazard is managed. The entry creates a mental shortcut. Someone is on it. But the entry was created 14 months ago. The equipment condition today may be significantly worse than it was when the finding was first written. That gap between the recorded condition and the actual condition is where accidents grow. The most common mistake is not negligence. It is a belief that feels completely reasonable on the surface. The logic goes, if the audit found the problem is under control. Someone is watching it. It is in the system. The team believes that an open finding in a tracker is almost as good as a closed one, because at least it is visible. Think of it like a crack in a dam wall with a yellow caution cone placed in front of it. The cone shows awareness, but the cone is not concrete. Awareness without action does not stop the water. Here's the first flaw in that belief. An open finding has no physical effect on the hazard. The flange leaks at the same rate whether the finding is 30 days overdue or 300 days overdue. The gasket does not know it is being monitored. Second, when finding trackers grow long, teams stop reading the oldest entries. The items at the top of the list are the newest. The oldest, most overdue findings sink to the bottom and become invisible in practice, even when they are technically visible on screen. Third, and most critically for PSM, the UK Health and Safety Executive Research Report RR509, published in 2007, found that organizations with large numbers of overdue safety action items showed a consistent and repeated pattern. The same finding was re-raised across multiple audit cycles, sometimes for years, without the underlying physical condition ever being corrected. The finding becomes a placeholder. It occupies the slot where a new observation would normally trigger an alert, and the system quietly normalizes the hazard. A reminder without a deadline and an owner is not a control measure. It is a scheduled regret. Understanding this closes the loop on why tracking the problem and resolving it are fundamentally different acts. The real reason audit findings go overdue is simple. The team is too busy. The scheduler deprioritized the job, and the maintenance window closed before the work could be done. The flange was flagged, the permit was ready, and the parts were on order. One more planning cycle and it would have been fixed. The system was almost working. But here's what no one tells you. The overdue finding does not just delay the fix. It actively conceals the recurring nature of the leak. When a finding is open and overdue, it occupies the slot in the tracker that a new audit observation would normally fill. The next auditor walks past the same flange, sees an existing open finding, notes it as already captured, and moves on. No new observation is recorded. The finding counter stays the same. No escalation is triggered. No trend analysis is possible because there is only one data point, not two or three. The overdue item has become a lid, pressing down on the signal that should be rising. In simple terms, imagine a hospital system where a patient's symptom is logged but never treated. Each time the next doctor checks in, they see the note and assume it is being managed by someone else. The symptom is documented, the patient is not improving, the documentation is doing the opposite of what it was designed to do. This is the hidden mechanism. The overdue finding is not passive. It is actively blocking the detection of a worsening condition. The leak is not just unfixed. It is invisible to the audit system that was supposed to catch it. Here is where the data becomes very specific, and where PSM management system requirements make this more than just a field observation. CCPS RBPS guidance identifies auditing as element 19 of its 20-element framework. Within that element, finding closure rate and finding age are described as essential performance metrics, not optional, not recommended, essential. The guidance is direct. A site that cannot demonstrate timely closure of audit findings is demonstrating a management system that cannot sustain its own integrity. Now add the API RP754 layer. API RP754 is the oil and gas industry's standard for process safety performance indicators, first published in 2010 and updated in 2016. It classifies overdue process safety action items, including overdue audit findings, as a Tier 3 leading indicator. A leading indicator is a warning light, not an accident report. It tells you the system is weakening before a release happens. Tier 1 and Tier 2 indicators measure actual harm and near misses. Tier 3 measures the health of the management system itself. When Tier 3 indicators trend upward, meaning more items, older items, longer overdue periods, API RP754 calls for management review and escalation before the situation reaches Tier 2 or Tier 1. At the flange in our scenario, no escalation was triggered. The Tier 3 indicator had been moving in the wrong direction for over a year. But because the finding was already recorded in the tracker, no new alert fired. The warning light was on, but the team had learned to see it as background noise. Think of it like the check engine light on a vehicle that has been illuminated for so long that the driver no longer registers it. The sensor is working. The driver has stopped listening. In 3 minutes, you will see the one mistake that destroys even teams who understand all of this data. This failure chain works exactly like a leaking dam, where the inspector keeps writing the same note, crack observed, monitor, without anyone ever pouring concrete. The note does not stop the water, and each inspection cycle that passes without repair makes the next failure more likely, not less. Step 1. The flange develops a small weeping leak. A weeping leak is a slow seep, not a jet, not a spray, just enough to stain the insulation and leave a faint hydrocarbon odor at close range. It is flagged in an audit finding. The system worked exactly as designed at this point. Step 2. The finding sits overdue. The next scheduled audit cycle arrives 6 months later. The auditor enters the area, consults the open finding register, sees the entry for this flange, and treats it as already captured. No new field observation is recorded. The physical condition has not been formally reassessed, but in the real world, that gasket has been cycling under process temperature and pressure for another 6 months. Spiral wound gaskets used in high-temperature hydrocarbon service have a finite number of thermal cycles before their sealing performance degrades. The clock is running, and the audit system stopped watching. Step 3. The gasket fails progressively. What was a weeping leak becomes a visible, continuous release. If the process fluid is a flammable hydrocarbon, and on most process units it is, the hazard classification changes at this point. What began as a Tier 3 mechanical integrity concern is now approaching a Tier 2 process safety event. The response required changes entirely. The 1998 Longford gas plant explosion in Victoria, Australia, investigated and cited in CCPS learning resources and Australian government inquiry findings, showed how a known equipment condition that was not properly reassessed under changing conditions could escalate faster than the emergency response system could manage. 2 workers died. The lesson was not that the equipment failed unexpectedly. The lesson was that the management system had stopped actively watching a known hazard, and by the time the condition changed, there was no time to respond correctly. The biggest mistake is treating finding closure as a paperwork task rather than a physical verification task. This is where PSM mechanical integrity requirements are most directly relevant. Under OSHA's Process Safety Management Standard, 29 CFR 1910.119, and under equivalent UK and international frameworks, mechanical integrity programs must include not just inspection and repair, but assurance that the repair was effective. Here's exactly what the failure looks like in practice. The maintenance team completes a gasket replacement on the flange. The work order is marked complete. The finding is closed in the tracker. Status changes from open to closed. Everyone moves on, and the site's audit closure metrics improve. But no one returned to the flange 7 days later to verify the repair held under actual operating conditions. No one checked whether the torque specification applied was correct for the service temperature range. No one confirmed that the replacement gasket material grade was rated for the actual process fluid, not the generic fluid listed in an outdated line class schedule. Imagine signing off a pressure test as complete without recording the test pressure or hold time. The form says done. The test result was never captured. 6 months later, when the same joint fails, the paperwork offers no clues about what went wrong, because the paperwork never captured what actually happened. CCPS RBPS guidance is explicit on this point. Closure of an audit finding must include verification that the corrective action was effective, not just that the action was taken. That distinction is not administrative. It is the difference between a barrier that works and a barrier that exists only on paper. Check your own site. When your team closes a mechanical integrity finding today, does someone physically verify the result within the first week of operation? If not, escalate that gap as a process safety concern. The management system element that covers this is mechanical integrity, and the closure verification requirement is not optional. Here is the concrete, field-applicable fix. 3 checks. No new software required. No new forms. Check 1. On your next site walkdown, pull up the audit finding tracker for your area and filter by age. Any finding older than its original due date by more than 30 days should be physically walked. Go to the equipment, look at it with your own eyes. If the physical condition has changed since the finding was first raised, more staining, more corrosion, a new smell, a new sound, that finding needs to be reassessed and its severity regraded, not simply rescheduled. Think of it like a doctor checking a patient in person, rather than relying on a note from a previous visit. The note tells you what the condition was. The examination tells you what it is now. Reassessment is not duplication of effort. It is the only way to verify that the hazard has not worsened during the delay. Check 2. Before closing any finding on a mechanical integrity item, a flange, a valve, a pressure-containing joint, require a post-repair field sign-off within 7 days of the repair date, not the work order close date. 7 calendar days after the line returns to service under operating pressure and temperature. That 7-day check is what confirms the repair held under real process conditions. Assign it to a named person, log the result. Check 3. Count your overdue findings by age bracket, 0 to 30 days, 30 to 90 days, over 90 days. Run this count at the start of every management review cycle. If your over 90 days bracket is growing from one review to the next, you have a systemic closure failure, not a scheduling problem. Escalate it as a management system concern under your RBPS or PSM audit element, not as a maintenance backlog item. That language shift changes who owns it and what response is required. CCPS RBPS element 19 calls this sustained audit effectiveness, the difference between a program that finds problems and a program that confirms they are solved. Apply these 3 checks, and overdue findings stop hiding recurring leaks. The system starts watching the physical condition again, not just the documentation. You now understand what 97% of people working near this problem never figure out. A finding in a tracker is not a barrier. It is a reminder. The barrier is the physical repair, verified under real operating conditions by a named person within a defined window. Teams that understand this distinction and apply those 3 field checks consistently stop recurring leaks before they escalate to releases. They are the sites that CCPS describes as achieving sustained audit effectiveness, programs that find problems and confirm they are solved, rather than programs that find problems and document them indefinitely. The CCPS RBPS framework makes this explicit. Mature process safety management is measured not by how many findings an audit generates, but by the verified closure rate and the age profile of what remains open. Most teams never make that shift. They measure audit quality by output, number of findings, coverage of elements, frequency of audits. High-performing sites measure it by outcome, how fast findings close, whether closure is verified, and whether the physical condition actually improved. In simple terms, the audit is not the end of the process. The verified physical fix is the end of the process. Everything between the finding and the verified fix is work in progress, not a closed barrier. If this video helped you see your own site's tracker differently, hit like so others in the industry find it too. Drop a comment right now with your answer to this question. On your site today, can you name one audit finding that has been open for more than 90 days without a physical reassessment? Subscribe for one PSM failure pattern explained clearly every single week.